today is talking about impact, and we want to talk a bit more about kind of some of the work that we're doing, and by we, I'm referring to a couple of three different organisations really that we're working with. And this session is a chance for us to tell you a little bit about what we're up to and what we're working on and why that matters and what we're doing. And also there's going to be a chance later on in the session for some for you to be able to have some kind of discussion and input into this whole process. So yeah, I'm just going to invite my collaborators to also introduce themselves now. So I'll just start with a brief introduction of myself, and then I'll invite the other guys just to give a brief intro. So I'm Luke Owen, and I'm based at the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience, or CAWR for short. That's at Coventry University. I'm a social scientist, and I'm a human geographer by background and training, and I'm working around the impact of community food initiatives. So that's where I'm coming into this space. Can I invite my collaborator, Claire? Can you just give a brief introduction of yourself as well, please?
Yes, hello. I'm Clare Horrell from the Real Farming Trust, and we've been working with Luke now for about 6 years, initially developing the social impact framework that Luke will be presenting later. And now basically we're using that framework to look at the social impact of the enterprises that we're working with under our lending programme, which is called the LEAP programme, which is basically a loan and grant programme which supports agroecological enterprises. So we've been sort of using the social impact toolkit that we developed in partnership with CORE practically in the field for the last 2 years.
Great, thanks, Claire. Okay, Suzy, you're next on my list. Can I ask you to give a brief introduction, please?
Hi, I'm Suzy. I work at the Sustainable Food Trust on the Global Farm Metric, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about today. I manage the working groups on the Global Farm Metric with Fabia.
Thank you. Yeah.
So shall I carry on? I'm Fabia Bromovsky, and I work with Suzy. Again, we both work with the Sustainable Food Trust, and we've been working on this creating a framework for measuring sustainability, which has its sort of byline of the Global Farm Metric.
Great, thank you. And then finally, from the Better Food Traders, we've got Natasha and Hattie. So if I can just ask you to also give a brief introduction, please.
Hi, I'm Natasha, project leader at Better Food Traders. Really looking forward to telling you a bit more about what we're doing and also to see how we fit together with the other two metrics that are on here.
Great, thank you.
Over to you, Hattie.
Hi everyone, I'm at Better Food Traders, and I work specifically on the data project there, and yeah, more will be discussed later.
Great, thanks very much, guys. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So it's a bit strange, as I say, talking to probably a couple of hundred people now, but not really knowing any of you or being able to see any of you all. But I'll ask my collaborators to jump in and to stop me talking if there's anything that cropped up in the chat, for example, or if there's anything that we need to pause and just discuss before moving on. So I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, just a bit of structure really. I'm just going to talk a bit about what we're going to do today and what we're going to be talking about and why that matters, which I think is often missed, sort of why are we doing this, why is it important. I'm going to talk about the 3 different tools or frameworks that are sort of being zoomed in on today. Then there's going to be a chance for some sort of breakout space, which will be interesting given the number of people we've got. We initially planned for this session to be obviously in person, and then for it to be online as a result of the conference going online. But there's obviously a lot of people in here today, so we'll see how that goes. And then yeah, we'll sort of close the session by harvesting some of the discussion and some of the topics and some of the points which crop up. So just a bit of housekeeping is if you can stay muted, and also use the raise your hand function as well if there's anything burning that you want to ask, but also post in the chat box as well. I think it's always good to have a lively kind of side conversation between people, debates, perhaps not arguments, debates, in the chat box. So by all means, do that, use that functionality. I'm going to move on. So there's the aims. Yeah, just, you know, four key aims really. Showcase those tools, identify how we might be able to work more effectively together. We're also interested as a group, so myself from representing CORE, the Real Farming Trust as well, Better Food Traders in the Sustainable Food Trust. We're also interested in how we can work more effectively together, and that's something which we need to talk about with each other, but also you guys as well. And then the final point there about networking as well. So point of conferencing and going to these places is to meet people, talk about what we're up to and where there might be opportunities for collaboration. So that's what we want to achieve today. Yeah, the Jamboard, I don't know if anyone here has used the Jamboard, or yeah, if you're not familiar with it, then please do click on that link. I don't know if one of my collaborators can just post that hyperlink into the chat box. That should take you to the Jamboard. So it's really, the Jamboard is a really simple tool. There's several sheets on the Jamboard. If you click on it, you'll see what I mean. And I'd like you to just post on there what your name is, the organisation you're representing, and then also what brought you to the session. You may already have done that in the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just, I'm hard to hear. Hang on a second. You may already have posted who you are and what you're doing, or where you're from in the chat box, which is fine, but you can also use the Jamboard for that as well. And we'll be using the Jamboard a bit later on today. Is that a bit better? Is that, I'm putting my gooseneck microphone a bit closer to me. Is that any better, guys? If someone can give me any feedback. Yeah, well, I'm going to continue, and if yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, please do log on to the Jamboard, familiarize yourself with it. Basically, there's like a side panel on the left of the Jamboard where you can get a sticky note. If you click on that sticky note, it'll bring up a bit of text, like a text box, which you can write on, and then you can post that onto the Jamboard. So it's a nice kind of output from this session, which we can refer back to later. So if you want to remain anonymous, you can, or you can put your name on the post. It's up to you. Okay. So yeah, let's just start by talking about why are we talking about this in the first place. So it might be obvious to some of us, but I think it's again important just to reiterate this, that why is it important to think about impact and assessing impact and understanding the impact of, broadly speaking, food and farming enterprises? And the reason for that is that, well, the world is put it bluntly, is in a bit of a mess. However you want to carve that up at whatever scale you want to look at, you know, there's a lot of crises that are intersecting and will become more acute as time goes on. So we've got a need to build resilience and to increase sustainability of our food and farming systems, of our society, of our, you know, of our health, of our ecological resources. So this has been really put into view, really, with climate crisis, COVID, the pandemic, highlighting some of these issues. You know, biodiversity. We don't need to overrate this point, but there's a real need that we've got to build resilience. We've got to transition to a more resilient way of doing things. And I think it's important to say that the business as usual conventional model of doing things, the conventional agri-food system that kind of broadly feeds a lot of people, and is kind of the common way that certainly in places like the UK where consumers are engaging and getting their food from, the conventional way of doing things needs rejigging, because in order to achieve resilience and transition to sustainability, the business as usual model just isn't going to cut it. So that's quite a fundamental point that many of you might be saying, yeah, we know that. and it's, yeah, I'm sure you do, but it's something that we really need to be really clear about, that things have got to change now. So in order to do that, evidence is really important, because we've got to build an evidence base to say that if this isn't working, or if this is unsustainable and not fulfilling what we need in terms of public goods and delivering on, mitigating the climate crisis, what evidence is there to suggest that alternative systems or different ways of doing things that can work? So we need to build an evidence base. And so that's kind of where this impact agenda comes in, really. It's thinking about what evidence, what information can we gather to say that actually there's a lot of good stuff coming out of these sort of community food systems or agroecological food systems that we need to amplify and really sort of bang the drum about. So that's kind of the starting point, really. I'm just going to quickly just check that there's nothing in the chat telling me I've disconnected. Okay, so I'm going to continue and move on.
Luke, just one thing that's come up is that it seems like there's a cap on the Jamboard for around 30 people.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. So are people still struggling to get access to the Jamboard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Maybe
once people have written something, come off, leave once you've written, and then we can kind of have people coming on and off throughout the discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also, I mean, for the breakout later on, it might be worth, I don't know if one of you guys can create a separate Jamboard as well for the, yeah.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great, just for later on, otherwise we'll have the same problem as well. Thanks for highlighting that. Again, I use the chat functionality to post, for example, who you are, and I know many people have already introduced themselves on there. So yeah, just following on from the point about evidence and why is this work important? Well, by monitoring and assessing impact and having this sort of sense of building an evidence base, it's helping to instigate this kind of culture, this culture of impact monitoring and collating evidence is something which needs to be built into people's sort of day-to-day operations, certainly within kind of community food systems or alternative food systems. Secondly, it's evidence and monitoring the impact of what you're doing enables people to see if what you intend to achieve is being achieved, and also to change tack if it's not. Thirdly, mechanism for organizational learning. It's a framework to develop and collate evidence. So by having like a series of tools, which is what we're going to talk about in a moment, there are mechanisms and ways for you to make sense of what's happening and for you to sort of collect and analyze the impact data that you're generating. Fifthly, why is this important? Well, monitoring and measuring impact is in itself a vehicle for capacity building. It helps people to sort of become better, more empowered at sort of generating data, working with different types of people such as researchers or building a movement. It helps to sort of capacity build and to almost sort of move towards this kind of citizen science type agenda, where you might have lots of different people collecting similar types of data, which generates a much bigger pool of data about a sector, for example. So that's why this work is important.
Luke, excuse me, could you maybe speak a bit louder? Apparently a lot of people have issues with hearing you.
Yeah, so yeah, I saw that. Sorry, I don't know if my microphone's not connected so well, but I'll move it a bit closer. Yeah, and then the sixth point there about comparisons. So a key point about collating impact about what your organization is doing or about what a sector is doing is that it can start to be compared to with what other sectors or what other businesses are doing. So it becomes kind of like a way to compare. And finally, monitoring and measuring impact, however you phrase that or however you define that, monitoring what you're doing or what a business is doing helps longitudinal patterns and trends to be revealed. And that's important to figure out if things are going well or if things are not going so well. So this whole kind of agenda about monitoring and measuring impact within, broadly speaking, alternative or agroecological food systems is really critical if we want to build that evidence base, which, as you mentioned earlier, is important for sort of sustainability transitions. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide, which is talking about the sort of the overview of our work, and I'm going to allow our other partners to talk a bit more about their specific tools and to give you a flavour of the kind of frameworks and mechanisms that are out there that are being used to collate and to harvest data. So I'm going to invite, first of all, Suzy and Fabia to talk about the global farm metric.
Thank you, Luke, and you know, set the scene incredibly well for us. I think what you will hear from all three of us as we present the focus of the work that we've all been doing in slightly different ways is that data is essential, that as we enter a period of incredible change, if we don't monitor the impact we're having now, we will find that there are all sorts of unintended consequences of potentially the work that we're doing because we're not monitoring constantly. The idea that at this moment in time we have perfect solutions, it will never be the case. So we'll get some things right and there'll be some things that surprise us, and therefore collecting data is essential at all these points. So the global farm metric is about measuring sustainability at farm level, and it's getting a globally agreed framework for measuring farm sustainability, because if we don't have the same language, if we're not measuring the same things, we can't, as Luke suggested, consider the impact of what we're doing over a long time, and we can't use that data effectively for many different outputs. What is different? Can I go to the next slide? Sorry, Luke.
Yeah.
So the aim of the global farm metric is, as I said at the beginning, provide a common framework, one that is used everywhere with a common system of measure. We couldn't sell potatoes if we didn't have a common system of weights and measures. We couldn't sell gold if we didn't have a common way of measuring its, purity. So we need to be able to talk the same language. If we're all able to measure at farm level in the same way, with a fixed framework, we would create a baseline of data from which farmers can make informed decisions. We know that well-traveled phrase, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we need to have the information in order to help us transition. The way that the global farm metric has been designed is by farmers for farmers. This is not about imposing another set of hoops to jump through or boxes to tick. The most important thing is for the farmers to have this information and for them to choose what they can do with it, so they own their data. If we have common data at farm level, it enables so many other things, because that data which is accountable or can be accountable can inform consumers about the sustainability of a system, food businesses about the sustainability of their procurement, retailers to label, governments to reward. So it's a very, very potent factor to have information in common that starts at ground level. Can I have the next slide? So, key feature of the GFM. It's a whole farm measure, and it measures not just across some of the things that might seem more obvious. It covers environmental impact, social impact, and economic impact. You cannot have a sustainable farming system if it's not economically sustainable. So it measures across the whole system, and it gives equal weight across the whole system. It's outcome based. We're in a period of enormous change at the moment, or we're hoping that we'll have enormous change. And therefore we have to, as Luke said, we need to watch that change. We want to make sure that the ideas we have today, the impact that they have, translates into the outcomes we thought we were going to achieve. The GFM, to be successful, must be practical, developed by farmers for farmers. This is not an excuse for a whole load of consultants to come in and advise you on what you should be doing. It should be a tool that can be applied at farm level, and it's about measure. How it's used will be done in many different ways. It wants to be embedded in everybody's systems, not a standalone system on its own. It's inclusive. Get it right. It should be applicable to all farming systems and landscapes. It's the generic measure of the impact that we are having on our land. A common language needs a baseline of data. We all need to understand what we mean by it. We have to be doing it in the same way. Independent. Global farm metric in its own right is only about measuring. It's not saying this is how you should do it. It's saying this is where you are now, which will inspire you to then improve on the things that you're doing less well, and pat yourself on the back, or go and sell the things that you're doing very well. Drives change. As again, it comes back to this thing with data. We're able to make decisions. We're able to make good decisions. If you aggregate that data, you're able to see patterns, and you're able to begin to see patterns emerging that can inform us in the long term. Moving to our last slide. Just to give you a very quick look, we can go to the GFM website, very recognizable wheel across 11 categories that you will recognize in many of the measures of sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals: human, social, biodiversity, plant and crop health, etc., etc. Below each of these, we have 3 key indicators, and below that, there is a series of data capture in order to gather the information at farm level. And then there are a number of calculations that are done in order to help interpret that data. As we know, any piece of data on farm has an impact. There's a geospatial impact on it. The soil in one part of the country is not the same as soil in another part of the country. And therefore, in order to interpret that data, you do need to have it compared to various data sets or proxies. And as our ability to collect this data in greater science, we know this will be refined over time. So there is a certain amount of a magic box, but magic box that everybody is using. This is not, there's no way something that the global farm metric is doing, and it will vary a bit from place to place. It captures the whole farm. As I said, in periods of change, the most important thing is that we are monitoring all things, so that in a dangerous time, for instance, now where we all understand net zero, etc., it's so easy to pursue one lens at the cost of others. So pursue carbon capture at the potential damage to biodiversity or water or soil health. So the global farm metric is all about collecting the whole basket, for better and for worse. Going to my final slide, I think, just to give you a sense of us all collecting the same data and the power it can have. It starts with the farmer. The farmer is the person with the responsibility to manage our planet, our nature, to the greatest extent. With the data, they're able to make the decisions they need to make, because they will be able to see what the impact they're having and how that's changing over time. The mission that we're on as Global Farm Metric is not to create something new, but to embed these measures in all the things that farmers have to be accountable for. So for assessment, certification, ELMS, that these measures are underpin them. They will not be all the measures one might need to take for specialization, but they'll be embedded at foundation level. Should drive better financial outcomes, both in terms of good farm management, but also because your product will have the credentials of good sustainable production, and obviously better environmental outcomes. With this data, we're pushing government that it underpins farm support. It's evidence for government of delivery of public goods. If you aggregate it, it can inform good policy, because it's solid data behind decisions that are made, and obviously evidence for sustainability development goals. Supply chain, around fixed data, you can set standards, you can provide labels, you can inform customer choice, you can give better health outcomes. And in the financial community, again, they too are pursuing with public pressure, you know, ESG and better investment decisions, again, with common data that's compared across different systems, they can incentivize better practice and which will drive change. So I think what we show in the Global Farm Metric is by collecting data across a broad set of categories, which for some people will say, but that's not of interest to me. You are able to monitor the sustainability of your system, but that data that you own is a powerful tool in order to give you a position in your market, whether it's in your local market, in your community, as well as possibly with government and other kind of support schemes. So data is power, is what I think.
Great, thanks very much, Fabia. That is, we will have a moment once we've presented from the Better Food Traders, and also myself. We'll have a moment where we pause and have some Q&A on it. So I'm sure you've got a few questions. Please do continue to use the chat functionality, and if we can't answer them today because of the sheer volume of people and the amount of time we've got, we will can always go back to them as well, because we will save the chat box. Great, thanks Fabia. That was really clear, really informative about the Global Farm Metric. I'm going to now just move on to the next slide, which is about the Better Food Traders, who are another one of our kind of collaborators. Someone that this network, we're basically a network of people that are interested in impact, and we're trying to figure out ways of how we work better together. So I'm going to pass over now to Tash and to Hattie to just give an overview of the Better Food Traders.
Thanks very much, Luke, and to Fabia too. And I really think that's important to hold in mind throughout this session, that data is power, and it is self-empowerment that we are looking for at Better Food Traders. We are a network. We offer support and create opportunities for collaboration for ethical retailers who are selling sustainably produced fruit and veg. We agree that it all starts with the farmers, but the next step is the retailers, where, and on the whole, this is for most farmers who aren't selling their own produce direct to citizens. We're a UK network. We stretch from Cornwall via Jersey to Scotland so far, but we have ambitions to take in Northern Ireland as well, and we want to grow with many more members than we currently have. We're identifying and helping small businesses who are an alternative to the current mainstream supermarket system. Supermarket corporations exert massive control over both ends of the supply chain, over what citizens buy and over who produces that food. The food system is complex, but nearly all of what we eat here in the UK is both sold and selected by a supermarket. At Better Food Traders, we believe that we must bring more diversity back into food retail alongside farming in order to survive the combined crises we're facing in our food and our wider systems. Our members are retailers who are what we call farmer focused. And what we mean by that is that those retailers create long-term, stable and fair relationships with the growers who supply them. And this in turn means that those growers and farmers can properly care for the earth's, our life support systems, as well as producing good, healthy food. So we have members who run veg box schemes, shops, market stalls, online hubs and CSAs. And we know we need to work together if we're to make a real difference to the future of our food and the health of our planet and its people. Over to Hattie for the next slide, please, Luke.
So that was more of a broad overview of what we're doing at Better Food Traders. This is a little bit more technical. So this is, I'm going to explain all the data that we do collect at the moment. Also, just in case I forget, I'm really interested to hear from you guys in the breakout rooms later, or over email in the future. So I'll put my email in the chat, because I'd love to hear if anyone has any opinions or ideas about how we're collecting data or what we're doing with it. I'd really love to hear other people's ideas. So we collect, I've split it into two sections. So we collect numbers, we collect from all of our Better Food traders in their application form. We ask for weekly customer numbers, we ask for sales figures, and then we also have a slightly more complex so we have two levels of membership for Better Food traders. So we have a membership level which are generally working towards accreditation, and then we have a slightly smaller group of accredited members who hit more of our principles, which we will explain a little bit later on. So in that in their process of applying for accreditation, they also agreed to give us a little bit more complex data, such as pay ratio, and we also require a lot of information about their sourcing practices, which is obviously really important for all of the project aims, as Tasha's explaining. So we also ask for some qualitative information as well. So things that kind of can only really be expressed through, you know, a form with writing in the boxes. So we have, you know, what is your policy as a business for involving customers in your business, and also giving back to the community and building that. So that's two examples there. Yeah, and as I said, we have our membership form, which is slightly smaller, with core data, and then including sort of location, where they're based and things like that. And then we have our accreditation form, which is where we start to really get to know our members. And we have really, really positive relationships with those, with all of our members, but we have a close relationship with our accredited members, where we have a lot of information about them, and we use our data to try and help them gain accreditation and become better businesses in themselves. And then we also send out a survey, which is more to do with the functionality of the network.
Okay, next slide, yeah.
Next slide, please. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks Hattie. So how we use the data that we collect, I've got on the slide some pictures of reports that Better Food Traders data has been used in reports and research projects. So, and I think this is something that both Luke and Fabia have highlighted already. Firstly, we see the collection of this data as a way of helping businesses focus on what it is that they're doing and whether they are actually creating the impact that they're aiming for. Collecting this data gives us data across the sector, the retail, the small alternative ethical retail sector, and it initiates public commitment from our members to the main values that we think underpin a food and farming system change. In our membership form, we ask applicants to make 3 commitments, and we believe these are the key commitments that will mean that a retailer is supporting the kind of impact we want to see. So number 1 is that they have a mission, that they are mission driven, prioritising farmer-focused and organic food supply. Number 2 is a written buying policy or procurement policy or supplier policy, whatever you want to call it, supporting that mission. And then thirdly, they need to track their supplier spend to prove that they are following their buying policy. So as a member, you sign up to those commitments, and then we'll ask you for feedback on them in a year or so later. We know that retail businesses, like all of our members and all of you retail businesses out there, are busy, really, really busy. And that just by taking the time to fill in an application form, you're stepping back, they are stepping back and gathering information that is really useful to us, but also to themselves. We've had feedback from members about, for example, breaking down their supply chain spend, which has enabled them to realise how much of it actually is directed or isn't directed towards agroecological farming. We have this example quote from a member who I won't name, but they say, "You'll be pleased to hear that we've started tracking our supplier spend data. We think we'll find it very interesting to have this data. My colleague who does the ordering says that just putting it together made him think more about his ordering. And this is exactly the kind of impact that we want joining Better Food Traders to have on the small retail businesses that we're supporting. And secondly, this data, of course, is crucial for campaigns, marketing, press, research. The reports that are shown in the slide all draw on Better Food Traders data, both quantitative and qualitative. We've been working over the 2.5 or so years since we started to shine a spotlight on our members, because they're all part of the food system that we believe is what the future needs. We want to tell that story and we need their data to do it. To talk about the importance of agroecology and the businesses that support it, we need their data. To talk about the crucial role of the retailer in supporting agroecological and organic farming, we need their data. On our website and in our blogs, to tell their story, we need their data. And most importantly, to push for the change in food politics that means embracing diversity, the small scale, and health for land, air, water, and all living beings. We need your data. Back to Hattie. Next slide, please, Luke.
Yeah, I thought I'd actually just start this off. I'm going to talk about what we see as the future for our impact measurement. But I thought I'd just pick up Rebecca's question in the chat, which is asking about Open Food Network. And this is something which I also thought about before I really knew what Better Food Traders was. But just to make it clear, we're not a selling platform like Open Food Network is. We're an accreditation platform. So we're like a badge of accreditation. And we also are a network of businesses and trying to foster a community of business owners or people working in this sector to be able to communicate with each other and use information from one another to help kind of progress this movement. So that kind of really comes into our internal impact measurement. So what I am doing with BFT is producing individualized reports and then also on using their data to kind of feed that back to them and say, this is what we can get from your data, and also creating benchmarks across our network of members. So we can also look at certain things that businesses are really interested in. So we have markup is one of our most popular ones, and then also staffing costs is really really important. At the moment, I'm looking into the use of volunteers in our network and how people are incorporating that as a measure to get the community involved, but also gain the benefits of that community as well. So we also, as we saw on the last slide, have been working with external, using our impact in external ways. So we have sort of really interesting comparisons with the mainstream. We're collecting data from our network in order to be able to compare it with the mainstream and really see where that impact is happening. And obviously also campaigns in order to so we can have that for marketing for our businesses, for ourselves, to grow ourselves as a network, but also political, as you saw on the last slide, which is part of all of that kind of wider policy work that we're all kind of working together on. So that's it from Better Food Traders, I think.
Right. Thanks, Hattie and Tash. That was really, really great, really clear. Yeah, so I'm going to talk now about another framework, which is what we've been working on. So that's CORE and the Real Farming Trust. And as I say, there'll be a moment after this where we can pause and have some sort of broader discussion and Q&A about it. So we've heard from the Global Farm Metric, from the Better Food Traders, and now I'm going to talk to you a bit about the CORE Real Farming Trust Social Impact Toolkit. I'm just going to put that link in the chat box. That's a website you can put into your browser and access. It's not compatible on phones though, actually, that website. So if you're on a phone, that won't work. But if you're on a computer, then you can have a look. So as I mentioned earlier, we kind of, the reason that we're all telling you about this and a kind of in this presenting this session is we've kind of gravitated towards each other through various discussions around impact.
Okay, there's good news.
Sorry, I'm just on mute. So yeah, we've all kind of gravitated towards each other to talk a bit about talking about impact and about what evidence and data is being collected and how it's being collected. So we're not necessarily we're still figuring it out. We're still figuring out how we all work together. But the kind of our angle, where we're coming into this, is around social impact. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the platform that we've developed and how we're using it and how it works and who it's for. So let's just carry on. If you can just keep yourself on mute, guys, that would be really helpful. Okay, so some of you may have seen this already. Some of you may have be using it, that you may have even been part of helping to develop it and to develop how it works. And this is kind of a legacy platform which was launched last year, and it kind of comes from a long-standing collaboration that Core have had with the Real Farming Trust, going back about 5 years, 6 years or so. And so yeah, what this platform is designed to be used by what we're calling community food initiatives or community food businesses, and it's a platform that enables them to be able to figure out and create a kind of framework to understand what social impact they're delivering. As I say, it's designed to be sort of standalone or quite standalone, really. It's not there to be too complicated. It's more of a kind of how-to guide, and it's got a series of different modules in it, which I'll explain about now. Yeah, I don't know if that link's not working. If you Google social impact toolkit, it should come up, Michael. So the way it works is we've kind of created it as this dartboard or wheel, and I'm still not sure what the best word is to describe it, but it's kind of on a page, really. And the way it works, so you can access this from different ways. You can start in the middle, or you can start at the end. And the way it works is that in the middle we've got social impact. Sorry, someone keeps coming back someone keeps unmuting themselves, I think. So the way it works is you've got social impact in the middle, and social impact is the broad kind of impact that we're interested in. If this was a live, if I was on the website now and could show you live, I can't go on it because the bandwidth won't cope, it won't work. But you can click on that button and it takes you into a portal which tells you all about social impact and what we mean by that. And then the next bit of this framework is the sort of the light blue circle, the light blue bits, which are the domains. So we've broken social impact down into health domains, community domains, and livelihoods domains. And then from that, the sort of the lighter blue circle, the third ring, we've got outcomes. And outcomes are things that happen as a result of what a business does, or what a community food business does, be it intentional or unintentional. They're things that materialize. And there's kind of 8 different outcomes or outcome areas that happen within kind of this world, right? And again, you can click on each of those buttons and it will take the user into a portal which will explain what each of those outcomes means and why they matter. The next circle, the green circle, is kind of the more measurement-y bit, where these are the indicators, and the indicators are important because they help us to, you have to measure something to know if you're achieving it or not, or to what extent you're achieving it. So the idea that you can use this is you can almost sort of cherry pick and create your own menu of indicators of things you want to assess or look at, and you can track that journey back to an outcome, to a domain, and then also to social impact. So it kind of works as a kind of on a scale. The outer ring is tools, and you can click on each of those tools, and they will take you to a template, or take you to a kind of a framework where you can literally collect data. Yeah, and so that's how it works. It's designed to be quite audio visual, and so there's a series of short films that sit behind each of these different modules within the toolkit. There's a screenshot there in the bottom left. There's an introductory video as well, which explains a bit more about how it's developed and where it's come from. And the other thing to say with this as well is that it's been developed through quite a long process, like a slow science process of working with community food businesses to sort of co-create it. Really, it's come from a very sort of what's the word, like a dialogue with different users and collaborators. So it's kind of rigorous in the sense that it's been developed from the ground. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Again, just some screenshots from about how it looks. So it's color coded as well. So the green background would indicate that this is an indicator. There's a toolkit explained sort of button in the top right hand corner of the website, which enables a user to go in and to have a explanation about how it all works and fits together. And as I say, there's lots of videos which kind of explain how to do this. And the reason why we're trying to do that is to try and keep things simple. And this is aimed quite specifically at let's say community food businesses, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. And it's designed to give people to develop that culture, that impact culture. And that's kind of where it's at. Okay, so that's how it looks. This is who it's for. So whereas we talked about, so like the global farm metric being something which we would perhaps use for any kind of farm or any food producing enterprise, the way that we've developed this is it's been more kind of bespoke towards the sort of community scale operations, community scale of food and farming. So when we talk about community food businesses, we might be referring to something like a CSA, a community supported agriculture. And that's where this particular tool would have real value, is to sort of be used at that level and in that kind of business. And so these different criteria is what we mean by community food businesses. So we argue that community food businesses should be locally embedded, trade for the benefit of the local community, accountable for the local community and transparent, focused on delivering broad community scale impacts, align with agroecological principles and practices, and have kind of values based in short food supply chains at the heart of their kind of operations. So that's kind of who this is particularly aimed at. And that's how we're applying this at the moment within our within a couple of projects that we're working on. Yeah, I'm not going to labor this too much because I don't want to run out of time to do the next stuff. Yeah, and the way that we use this tool is through a kind of life cycle, and it's very much taking some of the methodological steps that you would see within a social impact assessment. So this life cycle is where, let's say, a community supported agriculture scheme might decide to use this. They would have a look at what their aims are, the first step. The next step would be to understand what the need is and what kind of need that the community they're serving has and how they can meet that need. We would then map that community with looking at different stakeholders like volunteers, staff, consumers, and then you could look at the different indicators and tools that are available within that dartboard, that wheel. Build your own menu, build your own set of indicators, collect data, and there's kind of guidelines on how to collect data, but also the way we're working with this tool at the moment is that we're kind of working to support users to help collate and collect data, and also to make sense of it. And then finally, you kind of reflect on that data and also share it as well. And there's different ways that you might share that data. It might be through a report, it might be through it could be through a paper or a policy briefing, or it might be through whatever. It could be through numerous different formats. Yeah, so that's kind of our social impact toolkit. I just want to ask Claire, I probably missed a few things there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything about the toolkit and about how it's being used and maybe about how it's being developed.
No, I don't think so, Luke. I think you've pretty much summed it up. I mean, I think, yeah, we've just been using it. Somebody asked a question about whether it is it can be used by other sorts of food businesses. I mean, I guess it depends what sort of food businesses you have in mind, but you know, in theory, there's no reason why any food business could use it, but obviously because it was developed in partnership with a particular set of organisations. It started from the idea of what do those organisations think their impact is and what are they interested in measuring. So it came very much from where they were at. So obviously it's come with that in mind. So it is particularly focused on community food businesses, but there's no reason why any other food business couldn't apply the toolkit to their work and measure their impact against it.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Yes, that's a really good point. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide before we pause and can have a bit more discussion about this. Yeah, I mean, the other thing to say as well about this social impact toolkit is that although we've got a website, which hopefully many of you have been able to log on to and had a look at, it's something which needs to be regarded as kind of like a living thing. You know, that these things need to change with the times and change with what people want to look at. So the way that it's presented at the moment, perhaps it needs to be revamped. It might need to be revisited, and I think that that's totally valid. We need to see this as malleable and something that can evolve and not be static. So I just wanted to flag that as well, to say that these frameworks, and certainly our framework, needs to evolve with the sector and with the pressing needs of the sector. So yeah, okay, so what's some of our common themes then? Why are we doing this as a group? Why are we talking about this to you as a collective? Well, this is just a really crude schematic which hasn't got any, you know, there's no sort of scale really to it. It's all very abstract. But we were thinking about how is what we're doing, how does it intersect? How do they connect up with one another? How do we work together potentially? What's the kind of the overlaps or the areas for overlap? And I think if we start with the global farm metric, the global farm metric is by definition designed to be a kind of a bigger kind of tool, which is designed to work with any farm really, and any food producing enterprise could conceivably use that tool to understand their sort of sustainability. And it's designed to be not just an economic tool or a social impact tool or a tool that assesses environmental outcomes. It's designed to try and capture that on a much wider sort of scale, a much wider holistic way. And so the red box there that's been drawn is almost like it's applicable to all in many ways. And there's other tools out there which arguably would fit similar bill. So there's different frameworks which might also claim to do similar things to that. Where I think the Better Food Traders and the social impact toolkit universe sits within this is more at the kind of the smaller scale or the community scale, and so that's why they're sort of sitting further down on that graph. So obviously the social impact toolkit is focusing on social stuff, social outcomes, social indicators primarily, and the Better Food Traders perhaps more along the economic sort of outcomes or the economic indicators. But it's not prescriptive. This is all very, you know, we could easily spend some time carving this up and redrawing it. But it's just a schematic to show how things might fit together. And you might also be working with people or be someone yourself who's got a framework or knows of a framework that could be plotted on here as well to help plug a gap, to say, well, actually, there's not much here that talked about environmental outcomes at the community scale, but actually I know someone who's doing that, and you could plot that on this graph. So yeah, it's just a schematic really to show how things might intersect and where some of the gaps are. Yeah, if I move on to the next slide, this is kind of trying to ground some of that abstract thinking that I just mentioned a minute ago. So here we've got a series of principles. There's nine principles here, which are the 9 principles of the better food traders, right? So to be a better food trader, you need to sign up to these 9 principles, which is, it's about, you know, principle number 3, sourcing food sustainably. Principle 6, promoting ways of eating that are good for both people and planet, all these different principles. And you could argue that different parts of the social impact toolkit that we've got, that we've developed, they also align with some of these principles as well. And so there's clearly overlap there. And likewise, the global farm metric, well, yeah, they overlap as well. So for example, principle number 8 and principle number 9, we can see that there's strong synergy there where we might really be able to work closely together. We might look at this and say, well, principle number 4, maybe there's room for other frameworks or other people to come and collaborate, so we can look at that in more detail. So this is just a slide which I hope reflects how you might ground some of that abstract thinking I just mentioned, and think about how we can pool some of our energy and work better together. Yeah, so that's kind of it really in terms of the 3 kind of frameworks or tools that we're working with. And I just wanted to pause now for sort of maybe 10 or 15 minutes where we can just have a brief kind of Q&A, and it's going to be quite tricky to do that with as many people that we've got in the room. But I'm just going to close down screen share and just come back into the room. So yeah, I mean, I'll sort of try and share this. I don't know if we want to use the raise hand function, if anybody's got any burning reactions or any burning questions that you want to raise or share. We've got sort of, yeah, I think we have sort of 10, 12 minutes just to do that.
Luke, do you want us to address any of the questions that have come up in the chat? Some of them are relatively straightforward, or shall we leave them and answer them afterwards?
Yeah, I've not really been following the chat so closely. Yeah, I mean, if there's anything in there, Fabia, that's a quick field, then yeah, maybe just start with that.
I mean, the GFM is obviously sort of the practical aspects of the GFM have come up quite a lot, and I think I've seen from some of the chat, you've absolutely got it. The GFM is part mission and part delivery. It's mission in as much as we want us all to get together to create a common framework. The GFM has to have a name for the mission. It's not a name, we're not another tool out there in the space. We're not trying to create something different. We're trying to bring everyone together to do the baseline in the same way. And as Luke said, it can underpin all these different frameworks. It doesn't do everything, but it will do a baseline. So yes, lots of questions about who we're collaborating with. What we didn't spend a lot of time, but the GFM is actually a collaboration of lots of different stakeholders, from the kind of RAP and WWF and and the NGOs like that. There's a lot of the retail industry. Everybody wants this question answered. What the problem is going from us all saying yes, 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 to actually all doing the same thing. And that's what our mission is. We're working with DEFRA on DEFRA trials. And there was a question there about the public goods tool. The GFM grew out of the public goods tool. That was the first DEFRA trial, and we've built on that to create something that's broader. Not perfect, it's work in progress, and this year is a final year of lots of trials and also of scientific testing of it. Internationally, we are talking, we've got trials in Australia, Malawi, the US. We're working with international bodies. Again, everyone's saying yes, 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 we all want this, but the challenge is, what is this and how do we bring it together and get agreement to it? That maybe touches on a few. We have created a what we call a research tool, because in order to get people to understand what we're talking about, we have to be able to demonstrate it. And yes, we are working on trials with that research tool, but the long term is that these set of measures will be adopted by everybody. It won't be the GFM anymore, it'll be everybody using this baseline of data as an essential form of capture. And if DEFRA adopt it, then obviously there is a good reason for capturing it, etc. Many questions, and we will answer them more fully, but I thought they were some quite practical things. And the information is collected at farm level by the farmer. That's the key to it. The farmer owns the data first.
Thanks, Fabia. I'm just going to, I've got 3 hands up and I'm going to go in order of the hands up, and then we can come back to some of the questions in the chat box as well. So over to Tim Riley first. Tim.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I found it really interesting what's being discussed. And I recognise we're still at the very early stages of trying to provide an outcomes structure and framework. Developing outcome measures is fraught with difficulties. I know that firsthand. But I think this is really encouraging that if we can actually get on the ground data that can be built up into something that would have scientific credibility. But my particular interest is also about building onto that economic measures of benefit and disbenefit. And I say that because a lot of the work from economists at the moment in this area is even less well developed than that which we're discussing today when we're talking about on the ground outcome measures. So if we look at, I mean, even the Dieter Helm stuff, you know, it's academic down, it's not from experience and practical data up. And I think if we can actually try and bridge that gap in some of this work, not running ahead of ourselves clearly, but then we have a very, very, I think, compelling base to make arguments about where money is best spent, whether that's from private investment, public investment. And when I say private investment, I'm not just talking about, you know, venture capitalists trying to buy up a bit of land and think it's worthwhile doing this because it's on trend. I'm actually thinking about the people that want to start out on small and sustainable economic models that can aggregate for community benefit, and that using what's been described actually would have economic measures across community, whether that's at the agricultural level, at food supply level, whether that's at societal benefit, as well as health and other related issues. And so I think this is incredibly encouraging. I'm really hoping to follow it closely. If we could do it on the ground where we're farming, but also in work I'm doing more broadly, I'd be hugely, I think, excited by that. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Thanks. That's really interesting. I'm going to pass over now to Stephen Jacobs, next hand raised, and then I've got Johanna as well. Johanna.
Hi, thanks, Luke. Following on from what Tim's just said, I think the disbenefits is an important aspect. One of the issues that I've been looking at a lot is the stuff coming out of people like Tim Jackson, post-growth economics, and obviously people like Kate Rayworth with the donut economics, where you have a ring donut and we're supposed to exist, or we should exist, in a sort of happy medium. The issue for me, so I'm representing organic farmers and growers. We certify over half the organic land in the UK, trying to encourage farmers to go into something like a carbon tool, an assessment tool. They're keen to do it, but it's very time consuming. So one of them very helpfully said in one of the workshops we did last year, could it be so that they get a crib sheet and that it would be timed for a day when they're in the office, because most of the time they actually don't want to be in an office. That's why they're a farmer. And maybe if things like their organic certification or their red tractor or both, or their pasture fed certification, etc., if these data points can be lined up, I can see Fabia giving me the thumbs up. Yeah, well, it's that kind of, we can pin those things together. One of the points I put in had a sort of chat with everybody, including Andrew Tuddenham earlier, is one of the issues we face is a poor wealth distribution in food systems. So whereas large retailers are able to be working and continue to work on extractive capitalism, so they're taking, very little is going back down the pipe. So then we're seeing over the last, let's say, 3 decades, we've got less farmers in the country, the farms are getting bigger, that trend is worsening. So at some point, I think the better food traders model is essential for everybody. And that kind of model where you've got a trading platform, it's not a trading platform, sorry, you've got an accreditation for trading, that starts to make sense, I think, to some of our farmers. The problem is, and my question is, how do you go from the one to the other? So you've got your big volume markets, you're selling to your large multiple retail customers who buy from your farm and your mate's farm, process, wholesale, do whatever, send the stuff to Sainsbury's, Tesco's, other supermarkets exist. Who's collecting which points of data? So just lastly, just to say from what Tim Riley was just saying, if, and it's a big if, that those large retail economics are penalized for their disbenefits, that might start to even it out. I'm just not sure how we do that very easily. Thank you.
Can I answer? I mean, I think that ranged across quite a lot of different questions. As you say, you got the thumbs up because the whole idea of having a common framework and some common data points is that everybody who is measuring any form of farm capture, we want to encourage that this is the baseline data. Now, if you're collecting it for your organic farmers and growers certification, then you'll want more data in some areas. But if this baseline is collected, it's much easier for farmers to not be creating all their assessments differently. And that goes from DEFRA upwards or downwards, whichever. DEFRA seeing them at the bottom of the pile in a way. Time consuming, the reason we've designed it to start off with farmers is they've got to be able to collect that data. It is time consuming to do anything. So it must be useful to them first. This should not be data for the supply chain, data for the bank, data for DEFRA first. The whole point is it should be data that is useful to them first. What they do with that data is their decision from there onwards. If they use it for DEFRA and it enables payments, hey, well and good. If they use it to prove to their local community buyer group that they are meeting certain standards, good for them. If it gets them their different assessments or certification, even better. So that's the idea. That's the whole the baseline. Who owns the data? They own the data, but they can choose to give that data to others so that it can benefit them in terms of being able to sell into the big supermarket chain or whatever. But also, whether we like it or hate it, there is an awareness out there. There is customer pressure now on our big food manufacturers and our supermarket chains to do better. We need them to do better on verifiable data and not on greenwashing. And therefore, having common data enables them in their promises or maybe genuine attempts to be encouraging sustainability at their supplier level. We need it to be accountable by them and verifiable by their customers. So, you know, I hope that answers some of your many good and varied kind of questions around certainly that farm level data collection.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Fabia, for that response, and for Stephen as well for that very very thoughtful contribution. Thank you. I'm just going to ask Joanna as well who's got her hand raised to speak. Over to you. Are you there, Joanna? Joanna? Maybe it's oh no, you are there. No. Go ahead, yeah. We can't hear you, Joanna. I don't know if you've got you're showing us not on mute, but we can't hear you. I don't know if there's an issue with your mic.
Perhaps text your question if you're having problems with your audio.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to, yeah, Joanna, I don't know if you can hear us, but if you can, then if you can put your question into the chat, we can come back to it. And I'd just like to invite, is any final contribution that anybody wants to have or to say about this? Any clarifications thus far before we move on to the next part of the session? Okay, I can see Vicky, you've got your hand raised. Vicky, over to you.
Hi, I think the GFM sounds absolutely fantastic. What's the timeline? What do you want, when, and what are your, I'd love to know more about the timing of your goals.
Okay, so the timeline, we've been working on many different levels over the last 2-3, very intensely over the last 2 years. And the timeline in the UK is we're running a whole series of very varied trials in this year that will all feed into something that's called the Delphi process, which is a kind of scientific review of the outputs for the GFM. So the data that's collected and the sort of first line of information or interpretation that a farmer can receive from that data. And that will all take place within this year. So we are hoping to get to a sort of finalized framework indicators and outputs by the end of this year. But at the same time, we're having to work on all levels on the international platform, where again, we're at an earlier stage with a lot of discussion. I mean, this all started with the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is a kind of synthesis down from that. Everyone again saying we need this, but what we're working towards is how do we achieve it on a global aspect? Can we ensure that the principles and the framework is sufficiently generic that it can be applied everywhere with different geospatial information? And with different ways of actually capturing the data. So by the end of this year, we're going to have something that's much more robust, so certainly for the UK and Europe. The big question for us and what we want to achieve in this year is, will this be applied through a coalition of the willing? Will it be because it's adopted through a lot of the sort of farm management systems and the retailers, etc.? Or can we get it in DEFRA to adopt in the UK, DEFRA, Welsh Government, Scottish Government, all of whom we're working with at the moment, and then internationally for, on trading levels. But so we're working on many fronts.
Are you ready for us to contribute?
We're definitely ready for anyone to
contribute. What do we do?
So shall we communicate outside this chat? Because that's absolutely, we need that.
What we're going to do now is we're going to go into 3 breakout spaces, which might be a bit not quite so breakouty and as intimate as we hoped. But what I want to do is just spend a few moments with the chairs of each of those rooms to just kind of feed back to the whole group, maybe what some of the key highlights were that came out of that. Sorry, it's my cat. So let's do that. So we have a brief kind of rapporteur session. We'll start with room 1, if that's okay. So that was Clare and Tash. Can you feed back in a few minutes just kind of what you covered and maybe what some of the key points that materialized were, please?
I don't mind doing that. Or Clare, do you want to do it?
I don't mind, Tash.
Okay, I think the key challenges that came out from about collecting impact are kind of the philosophy of data and whether there's a complete embracing of the idea that we should really be collecting data. The practicalities of it, time with 2 exclamation marks even, and other practicalities. The validation of it. So a lot of this is self-assessed trust or self given. So essentially based on trust of the person whose data it is. So that was another thing. And lastly, what or who is it for? And really knowing what it's going to be used for and that it's a useful thing to do. I think those would be the 4 things. Claire, would you add anything?
No, I think that's the 4, yeah.
Great. Yeah, does anybody else who was in that room want to briefly just, well, you can do it in the chat box rather than perhaps talk because we might run out of time, but by all means just add to what's been said. Thanks for that very succinct summary as well, actually. That's really useful. An interesting philosophical point as well about the collection of data as a thing in itself. Yeah, I mean that's probably something for later on in the evening with a brandy in hand, I think. But no, very really valuable points. Yeah, so the second room was myself and Hattie. We kind of facilitated or chaired that space. Yeah, and we were talking about, so we'll just give some feedback on that one. So we talked about what's the most useful ways we can all work together. And yes, I mean, I felt that we perhaps raised more questions than answers in doing this, which is never a bad thing. I think that's why we do these sessions. But yeah, there was some interesting points being made around kind of access to different tools, to different frameworks, to different data sets, and how to make things accessible for different people and to make that access equitable, and so that the benefits from users is equitable. Yeah, there was an interesting point as well about incentivizing and how you incentivize engagement with the collation and production of data. And that's something that is a kind of an enduring question, is what's the incentive for someone who is time poor, resource poor, perhaps doesn't want to be filling in stuff, what would rather be outdoors, rather be growing and selling. How do you incentivize those kind of enterprises and those kind of individuals to engage with this whole universe of impact and monitoring and data collection and data sharing when it's not clear that there's a clear benefit, especially if there isn't funding or someone able to support if it's designed to be done by that person or by a business on their own. So ways of incentivizing impact collation and monitoring is really important. I'm just scanning the Jamboard as well for some other points that were raised. I think there was also an interesting point that was raised around kind of the need to be sensitive to geography and to different territories, each having their own distinct culture, food products, their own topographies. These are all things which means that the practice isn't a one-size-fits-all necessarily when it comes to collating and monitoring data, and that we need to be sensitive to that. Yeah, Hattie, I don't know if there's anything else that stood out that I perhaps skipped over.
No, I think that was pretty much everything that we spoke about. At least I haven't had a chance to read through everything that was put on the board yet, so I'm sorry if there was something that hasn't been said aloud, but we'll definitely be reading them.
Yeah, and for those guys that were in our breakout room, the second breakout room, put in the chat box anything that I might have missed or Hattie and I maybe haven't articulated right now. Yeah, that's kind of it really. So I certainly found that very useful to be in that space. So thanks for those that, yeah, Vicky's put a point in there about food hubs and having kind of linked up, yeah, joining up. That was another really good point. Yeah, so I certainly found it very useful. So thanks for those that contributed and took part in that space with us. I'll hand over to Suzy and Fabia, who I think were in the third room as well. If you can just give us again a short summary about what came out of that'd be great.
We certainly were. Our question was, how can we use data to make food system transformations? And we had a very interesting conversation. I feel that I've not made as good a use of we've got wonderful stuff up on the Jamboard, but I can't say that I've absorbed it all, because of course, I'm so bad at multitasking, so I'm busy chatting and not doing much reading. But I think some of the things that came out of our room were, you know, what's the right information to choose? Very, very important. You know, obviously a lot of the questions in our room came through the sort of GFM lens, I have to say, just because I happen to be the person that questions were directed at. You know, how can farmers, you know, have the time to do this? How can it be useful to them? There's some quite good, interesting points on the Jamboard about, you know, quite often it's the people who are already doing good that are constantly having to jump through assessment hoops, you know, to get their organic certification or whatever it is. And I suppose we're trying to impress that we've got to make this information useful at source, not just useful down the supply chain. We had a bit of a conversation, which is very big on my side too, about how do we actually build this consensus? You know, this only really works if we do all start to create common languages and do create common measures. And that progressed into, you know, it's definitely what we're working on, but we're heavily weighted at the moment of an experience in the UK. How do we make this really applicable globally? How do we absorb, or how do we fund the costs in you know, places where they're not so digitally connected? The food chains are not so sophisticated. Who pays for that? Who pays for the collection of this data? And you know, we started to explore some of that, and we're certainly thinking about it and running trials in places where this is the case, and where either governments or supply chains are providing that support or that glue, and where the kind of digital networks aren't there. We talked a little bit about data collection and how it can be collected through, you know, some of the really good schemes already, like citizen science, etc. But I have to say, we touched on, you know, there's so many interesting things going on, but we touched on some of the answers and feedback, and we will now definitely absorb the very good comments that are up on our Jamboard, you know, and of how powerful this can be, you know, to avoid greenwashing, to provide accountability, to really mobilize finance in different, you know, because of the information that farmers will now hold. So it was a good experiment. I'm not sure it's been a fantastic conversation. I'm not sure you know, whether we kept enough on topic, I'm not sure, but we learned a lot or I learned a lot from the conversations we had.
Thanks.
Oh, there was one other point, sorry, Luke, that I missed. The other thing that we talked about was how it was really important to link the data collected at farm level into the advisory services, you know, which is absolutely, from our perspective, the point of the GFM, is that everyone collects this data, and all the old services that are out there, the farm management systems, the advisory services, use that data to then advise farmers how to improve their impact. So we're just a part in the chain that already exists out there to mobilize transformation.
That's great. Thanks, Fabia. I don't know if Suzy, anything to add? No, that's cool.
Don't worry, that was.
Would confess that I hadn't quite seen how much was going on there were 2 Jamboards, so I will bring that together and we'll share that.
Without Suzy's clarity and all that went on while we were all talking, you wouldn't have got such a good response back. So thank you, Suzy.
Thanks, guys. Okay, I don't think I need to. I mean, we're very nearly finished now. I don't necessarily need to share my screen again. Just give us 2 secs whilst I just close down all these various Jamboards. Yeah, so that's kind of bringing us to a close then, everybody, and I'd like to thank you all for participating today. Just going to post something in the chat box. Yeah, that's kind of the final point I wanted to make. It's in the chat. So from our end, from where we're sitting, really, as I said to you earlier, we're kind of a nascent network, if we can call ourselves that, where we've kind of gravitated towards each other because of the nature of our work. We've presented what we're working on and what we're doing today, and harvested some really valuable feedback on a couple of key questions that, well, 3 key questions that we're grappling with. So that's been super valuable. And I hope that you've also found it useful, enjoyable, stimulating. I mean, I always find that the Oxford Real Farming Conference is always an energetic way to start the year. So I certainly feel like this has been a really useful session. But we need to digest some of this and collate and digest what's come out of the multiple Jamboards and the chat, you know, and the different conversations that have gone on. So that's something that we'll be doing. Yeah, these kind of discussions, these points that we've discussed and grappled with are things which will help us to inform proposal development. You know, if we're seeking funding to amplify the work we're doing, this is all super valuable because it's, you know, it's helping us to build our proposals and build our arguments for funding. I'd like to create a sort of a 1-pager or maybe a 2-pager of the summarising this session, which I'm not sure if we can send that out to you because I don't know if you've got your contact details, but you can always email me or any of the team if you want to see that. We can just sort of send that out to you. Just a sort of short summary really of what's covered. I think this will be recorded as well, this session. So you can always watch back the session as well. Not the breakouts though, they're not recorded. And the final point is around cats. The final point is around collaborating. If you want to collaborate with us, and I use us in a very loose way, but you know, you've heard from different people in different organizations. If you're interested in collaborating or learning more, reach out. And if obviously if we're in real life, in person in the conference, we'd have a coffee, sit and have a coffee, or we'd sit and chat over the water cooler now, but we don't have that luxury. So it has to be a little bit more clunky through emails and through social media or whatever. But let's keep conversations going. I mean, I'm keen to that we keep talking about this and maybe have some kind of Oxford Real Farming Conference impact working group that moves forward from this, and we become part of an ongoing thing. So that's it for now. Does anybody have any final points or anything that they want clarifying? Did you have contact details? I'm not sure if I've shared contact details actually with this. You've got our contact details on the conference website, so you can always get in touch with us that way. But that's it for me, guys. I don't know if any of the other speakers want a final word.
No, thank you for all your really interesting feedback to us. Please, can we keep up the conversation? I think in all cases, we are collaborators, not trying to do something different. We want something that brings us all together, not divides us.
Definitely. Yeah, and I always remember as well that if this was easy, it would have been solved by now. So the fact it's not, it means that that's why we keep doing it, because it's hard and it is difficult, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So let's keep going, keep talking, yeah, and reach out. You know, let's keep it going. So thank you very much to all my speakers who have helped prepare the session and facilitate. Thanks for everyone who's participated, for their energy and their input, and for those that have listened or you know, hopefully you got something from this. Thanks for your time. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you in other sessions throughout the rest of this conference. So thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.